Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here to celebrate this incredible new instrument. It's truly an investment in the future of this church, and I have to say it's astounding. I actually knew the previous instrument. I had played it one time. I'll have a story to tell a little later in the program about that. I just want to say this is an incredible step forward for you. And I think you'll hear that throughout the course of this program. I like to start out right away showing off as many different colors as I can. We heard the instrument's French accent, which of course it does very convincingly in that opening Prelude and Fugue by the French Romantic 20th century composer Marcel Dupré. Next, I'd like to go to Germany, where we'll hear a set of variations on Lutheran Christmas tune that we don't know well in this country, but it's a delightful little folk-like tune, O Run You Shepherds, and I think begs for all sorts of coloristic treatment. So you'll get to hear kind of an around-the-world tour of all of this organ's flutes, strings, reeds, and principal stops in about 8 minutes. There are a total of 9 variations, and you'll hear wonderful echo effects, all culminating in a rollicking shepherd's dance. So I hope you enjoy this set of variations by Max Drischner. Thank you. So I mentioned that I had played the previous instrument, the schlicker, and the reason that I played it is that I came to Baton Rouge to play an audition for LSU. And LSU at that time didn't have an organ on campus suitable for auditions and concerts, and so the audition was held here. I enjoyed playing the instrument. I played some music that was, I think, well suited to it. In fact, the Bach D major Prelude and Fugue that you'll hear in just a few minutes was the very piece that I played in this room. Interesting story. I have a good number of relatives here in Baton Rouge, the Kirkpatrick family, and some of you may have known my great aunt Edith Kirkpatrick. I'm just curious, how many of you knew her? Oh, that is fabulous. Well, I know she is looking down from heaven, and I so wish that she could be here. But this was so funny. Those of you who know her know that she was quite a grand lady and was definitely in charge. And she had already mapped out the entire plan for my future education. I was going to be at LSU, and she knew where I was going to live, and all of this. So I don't know how she finagled it, but she sat in on the audition. I guess that was important to her. So she was seated up in the balcony where you all are. And after the audition, I saw her, and I noticed her eye, a blood vessel had burst in her eye. So the white part of her eye was entirely red. And I said, "Oh, Aunt Edith, are you okay?" And she hadn't even noticed it. And she looked in the mirror and realized. And she said, "Well," she said, "that must have happened during your playing." So I don't know if it was my playing or the sound of the organ that caused her eye problem, but in any case, so it's wonderful to have that connection back to this space, and the space is transformed. It sounds completely differently. The acoustic is so favorable for music now. And for the spoken word. There's total clarity for both this morning, and that's not always easy to do. And it gives the perfect sounding board for this instrument. So I'd like to play two very contrasting pieces for you next. One is the Pastorale by Raymond Haan. This is a beautiful little piece that I discovered when I was in high school and have played it off and on over the past several years, and Lamar had heard a recording of me playing this and asked if I might be able to include it on the concert. And I think it's just wonderful. It's in ABA form, which means at the end you'll hear the music from the beginning. The middle section has this wonderful string orchestra sound that builds up and builds up and builds up before dying away. That is another thing that the previous instrument could not have done. Then after the end of that, I'd like to play for you Bach's D major Prelude and Fugue, which is a piece full of contrasts. It is ultimately very joyful, but as soon as the opening kind of virtuosic, joyful section begins, we suddenly change to a different sound, a different kind of mood, and then oscillate back and forth. The prelude ends with a very serious and dissonant, for Bach's time in particular, grave section, very slow with double pedal and thick chords and tense harmonies that set us up then for one of the most joyous fugues in all of Bach's output. So I hope you enjoy these two very different pieces, one by the 20th century Raymond Haan, and then J.S. Bach's D major Prelude and Fugue. So, it's hard for any of us to do all things well. It's similar with organs. It's hard for them to do all things well, but this one pretty much does. So you've heard French music, you've heard some German variations with color, you've heard soft lyrical colors with beautiful solo stops, you've heard Bach with all sorts of different textures and choruses, and now we come to a part in the program where we hear some music of the church. My grandmother used to live 2 doors down from the church where we were members, where I would go to practice because we didn't have an organ in our home. And when she saw that I was there practicing, she would come up and knock on the door and ask if she could come in and listen to me practice. And so I was always glad to have a captive audience for whatever Bach Prelude and Fugue or Toccata, whatever masterpiece I'd been working on for the past 6 or 7 or 8 months. And so I would tell her a little bit about the music, just like I'm doing with you, and I would start playing. But I noticed a pattern. About 30 seconds into whatever I was playing, I would see her reach for the hymnal and then spend the rest of Bach's masterwork flipping through the hymnal. And then I would come to the conclusion of the piece expecting, some grandmotherly adulation and say, "Great job, keep it up, you're really coming along." She would just look up and say, "Could you play number 378 now?" So I've learned it's always important to play something everyone knows. So this is number 378 in the United Methodist Hymnal, which was my grandmother's favorite hymn, Amazing Grace. And we're going to hear it in 2 different settings, 2 very different settings. Interestingly, by former organists at the Crystal Cathedral, now Christ Cathedral in Garden Grove, California. The first by Frederick Swann, who is the director of music and organist there and at the Riverside Church, and lots of large posts with large instruments that made him really an expert at orchestrating and getting wonderful colors out of the instrument. This particular Amazing Grace began as an improvisation for an Hour of Power broadcast, and he got so much feedback from it that he decided to write it down and make some money off of it. So you'll hear in what's just 3 minutes long a great display of color and different textures. And then after that, a completely different setting, a joyous toccata by Chris Pardini, who was Fred Swann's successor as organist there. When I first heard this piece, I thought, that's a strange tune on which to do a toccata, because I always associate Amazing Grace with something more gentle and flowing. But then I thought about the last verse. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. And I feel like this toccata perfectly captures that. So I hope you enjoy these 2 very different settings of Amazing Grace. It is good to play something everyone knows. So one of the arts of organ playing from about a century ago was the art of playing transcriptions, works that were originally written for other instruments to be played on the orchestra. Sometimes this was out of necessity. Churches often couldn't afford to hire a whole orchestra to put on Handel's Messiah or Haydn's Creation or various oratorios, so it fell to the organist's job to be the orchestra. That then extended into other realms when someone said, you know, I like this particular piece of orchestral repertoire. I wonder what that would sound like on the organ. And so there was an art of playing transcriptions that fell out of favor in the middle part of the 20th century. And we had fewer instruments that could do that. But that art has seen a resurgence in the latter part of the 20th century. And of course, now it's really an expectation of many eclectic organ builders to build instruments that have all the expressive capabilities to be able to do this. So, all to say, it's a great excuse to play some of the most beautiful music ever written. And I'd like to play for you one variation from a larger work called Variations on an Original Theme, which is often called the Enigma Variations. This is Nimrod. Now, where does that name come from? Well, Edward Elgar wrote these variations and dedicated each one to a family member, friend, or colleague. But the part of the enigma was for each person to figure out which of these variations was written for me. So, Nimrod, as many of you know, was the mighty hunter in biblical times. And I believe he was a great-grandson of Noah. The word hunter in German is Jäger. Elgar's publisher of his music was named Jäger. So this Nimrod is dedicated to his publisher and friend, Jäger. So you don't need to know that to enjoy the piece, but if you're ever on Jeopardy, and this is your final Jeopardy question, you'll want to keep that in mind. So not only is this beautiful music, but part of the challenge is building a seamless crescendo and diminuendo. You'll hear what I mean, but it really draws a sound out of the organ that is very non-organ-like in the way that we usually think of organ music. So I hope you enjoy this Nimrod from the Enigma Variations by Edward Elgar. And now we come to the audience participation moment, kind of a seventh inning stretch, if you will. And so really the chief goal of this instrument is to inspire congregational singing, to support it vigorously, to support it sensitively and colorfully. And so we're going to do that just now, and we're going to celebrate how incredibly it does this. A little word about the piece that will follow, which is based on this hymn, Praise to the Lord the Almighty. Aaron David Miller is a wonderful composer in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota. And he came to Dallas about 10 years ago to play a concert at a church where I served. And he opened the program with one of his own compositions, and then the whole second half was going to be an improvised symphony based on themes submitted by the audience. That's incredibly impressive, the people who can do that. I'm always a little suspicious when I'm talking to them that they're somehow downloading my social security number and my bank account numbers from my brain. To have a brain that works like that is quite incredible. One of my friends came up, a friend who used to sing in the choir, came up at intermission, generous, wonderful, older gentleman, and he said, how do you like his music? And I said, oh, I love his compositions. It's great. His playing's wonderful. This is just a joy. And he said, would you ever like for him to write a piece for you? And I said, oh, let me think about that. Let me look at some of his other music, kind of see what his style is. Maybe we look at some other composers. I'm not sure. Let's think about this. And so he nodded, went back to his seat. We heard a stunning second half. The improvised symphony was just hair-raising and colorful and wonderful and vigorous. It was terrific. So then my friend came up to me after the conclusion of the concert, and he said, well, my wife's over there writing the check for your new piece. I said, okay, I guess we are commissioning something from Dr. Miller. So I went over there and kind of met his wife, Sue, right about the time that Aaron was getting there, and she was ripping the check out of the checkbook and handing to him. And I said, well, I hear you're writing a new piece for me. I said, how big of a piece will that check buy me? And he looked down at it, and his eyes kind of lit up, and he said, however long you want it to be. So I said, you know what would be great is if we just took all the wonderful ideas that you just displayed in your improvised symphony, a dramatic, flashy opening, a mixed meter, irregular meter, scherzo section after that, a really colorful, harmonically adventurous aria, slow section to show off lots of colors, and then an exciting toccata to end. And then Sue, the lady writing the check, said, and you must write a treacherously difficult pedal cadenza for Dr. Welch. So I said, thank you, Sue. And so we had essentially written the piece for him standing right there. All he had to do is go back to Minnesota and put it in his computer. He sent me a draft about 2 months later, and you never know what you're going to get when you commission something, thus my trepidation, but he is fabulous, and I think you'll hear that in this piece. It's quite wonderful. So first we're going to sing the hymn on which it's based. If you'll notice some instructions in there about singing all and then men and then trebles. Trebles means women and children or men who like to sing really high. We didn't put women and children because it sounds like everyone into the lifeboats, women and children. So if you'll just observe those, there will be a little interlude before the last verse, and just sing with gusto. There will be an introduction first. You're welcome to stand.